Well, hi everyone. I'm Daniel Williams, Senior Editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. We are back today with another Mindful Medicine podcast, and I'm so happy to say that we have Britt Frank joining us today. Britt is a licensed neuropsychotherapist and award-winning professor and the author of the book, The Science of Stuck. Now, I did want to add one more thing. You may be familiar with Britt's name if you're attending the MGMA Operations Conference in Vegas coming up here shortly, because Britt is going to be one of our keynote speakers there. So without further ado, I do want to welcome you into the show. Britt, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I got a little nervous for a second when we were talking offline. You said you were in Kansas City, and I went, oh no, another Chiefs fan, because we're in Denver here. But you said
sorry.
You're a New Yorker, though. Are you now living in Kansas City? Have you caught the fever and everything?
You can't live here in Kansas City and not become a Chiefs fan. I'm so sorry to every place I've ever lived.
Well, we bow to greatness, and it is just like, oh my gosh, yet again. So, because we're in Bronco land here in Denver, and I'm the same way. I was in the South, I was in California, I moved here, and it's just part of the fabric here. So I totally get what you're talking about, as well as being a fan and just kind of adopting those teams when we move to those cities. So it's really good to get to be here with you and share this space with you today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about your book. We're going to talk about your talk that you're going to provide at that operations conference. So let's get to this idea of being stuck, because that was something that I was really interested in. What do we mean by that? What do we mean by getting stuck? And can you just initially just define that for us?
Yes, and it was so important to me to call the book The Science of Stuck and not The Science of Trauma or The Science of Mental Health, because not everybody identifies as having a mental health challenge or some trauma from their past. But show me a human who does not know what it's like in some capacity to be stuck somewhere: finances, fitness, relationships, career. And the way I define stuck, and it's important that I name this, because stuck is not things beyond our control, natural disaster, wildfire. Those are not people who are stuck. Those are people who are in very catastrophic situations. To me, and my body of work is where stuckness refers to, I have no reason why logically I can't do the thing, whatever the thing is, changing from coffee to water, or fitness instead of binge watching your show. There's no logical reason why I can't make the jump between what I know I want to do and what I'm doing. That gap is what I call stuckness. And there's a solve for that. And that's what my work focuses on.
Okay. I like that you combine working out and binge watching, because I've found that you can binge watch while you're on the treadmill. So,
Yes, it's fantastic. Habit stacking.
I know that definitely works. One other thing I do want to ask you about it. You mentioned financially stuck. So I just made an appointment with my accountant to do my taxes. Yesterday I made this appointment, and so it's coming up. I've got to go gather all the papers. What is financially stuck, though? Is it stuck in a certain tax bracket, or define that for us?
Yes, and we could do a whole separate podcast on financially stuck. So people generally, and the research shows this, will make big financial decisions, not from the logical part of our brain, but we make big financial decisions from the emotional part of our brain. And whether that is trying to level up your income, whether that's purchasing a home, whether that's setting aside money for retirement, or whether that's being willing to look at your credit score, and I've worked with people on every level of the socioeconomic ladder, whatever you want to call it. Everyone has some sort of financial thing that is either a sticking point or something they rather not look at or rather not deal with. And when we can approach our finances and get unstuck from doing the things that we need to do financially, then that levels up our entire life, because how we do one thing is how we do most things. And so I've found in my private practice financial stuckness, and that doesn't necessarily mean lack of financial resources. It's the management of them, it's what you do with them, and then top of this is it's how do you we feel. What's your relationship with money? I don't know a lot of people who can say, I have a really peaceful relationship with money, no matter how little or how much they have. And that's an area of stuckness we can all relate to.
Right. Okay. Let's focus in on a couple of other things, because as I'm hearing you talk, I start thinking about things. This is our mindful medicine podcast where we do get into some of the mental health or some of the ways that the behaviors that we have in certain ways with certain things. One of the things about mindfulness is calming the mind, calming that monkey mind and the overthinking. One thing that I was thinking about was paralysis by analysis, where we overthink and we become stuck. We've got, let's say, let's make a deal, and we've got door number 1, 2, 3, and you go, I can't make a decision. Talk about that overthinking where it just completely shuts us down and we are stuck in that space and don't make a decision.
It's so real. And decision fatigue is real. And we know from the research that having lots and lots and lots of choices doesn't necessarily equal lots of feeling spaciousness. Often the more choices we have, the more stuck we feel. And the thing about overanalysis and that rumination spiral is that the opposite of stuck is not insight. The opposite of stuck is action. And so if you're stuck trying to make a big decision, I liken this to a game of chess. Sometimes you have to move the pawns before you can make the bigger moves with those bigger, fancier strategies. And a pawn for a fitness goal is not take a 30-minute walk after work. If you're struggling with anxiety or any type of mental health thing, we know movement is medicine. Mindfulness is medicine, movement is medicine. And so moving a pawn might look like, I'm just going to put my sneakers by the door. And I call these micro yeses. And they work for anxiety, for overthinking, for rumination, for depression. Micro yeses are the smallest possible thing that you can do cut into 20 pieces. A micro yes is something so small you almost feel ridiculously silly doing it. But neurologically, what micro yeses do is allow you to make little gains, which gives you dopamine, which then generates momentum, which then brings the clarity that you're going to need to make those bigger chess moves or those bigger decisions. So micro yeses are the solve for how do I get myself just moving? Because once I'm up and running, then I can, most people know once I get to the gym, I'm fine. Once I start the email, I'm fine. It's solving for the starting gate. Micro yeses do that.
Okay. I love that so much. One thing that I found in researching you is you say that motivation isn't necessary to get unstuck. Is that getting back to the micro yeses where we're doing the hacks or the best practices? I'm putting the shoes by the door. I'm maybe logging into my favorite meditation app and just doing a 5-minute meditation rather than going to a 3-day silent retreat in the woods. Talk about that, where motivation necessarily isn't the answer.
Motivation is wonderful, so I'm certainly not anti-motivation.
Right.
But it's so overrated. This idea that you have to feel something to do something is completely antithesis to the big goals that we have. There's lots of things that I don't particularly want to do on any given day. Eating McDonald's is more fun than eating vegetables. And sitting down to write 60,000 words is not always a fun time. There are lots of other things I'd rather be doing. So if we wait for motivation, often we're not going to get anything done and we're going to stay stuck. But momentum is the thing that generates motivation. So if you think of physics, the principle of inertia, an object in motion will stay in motion. What we need is not to feel like it. What we need is a force, momentum to generate the change. Micro yeses are tiny and they don't look like much, but micro yeses compounds, and then you can go further and faster, and then that generates momentum. And I always say momentum beats motivation every single time.
I love that so much. Let's talk, I know you're a neuroscientist, so let's nerd out on the brain science a little bit. Just in a layman's terms, I'm sure that's how you speak to your audiences if they're not neuroscientists. What is clicking? What's going on? What's firing in the brain when you get those little wins, like by having put those shoes there by the door and you put them on, you take that walk down the street just to get the mail or something, just to get off the couch, whatever that win might be. What's happening in the brain?
And just to be responsible and clear, I'm not a neuroscientist.
Oh,
I don't have a lab. I don't do research. I'm a neurotherapist, which means that in my practice, I have training in how our brains brain so that people can get beyond the thinking into some of the physiology. But it's important so people don't say, Britt, you're not a neuroscientist. I know.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you for that.
So what happens, to answer your question, what happens in our brains when we get those little wins is it avoids, and most people have heard the fight, flight, freeze response. Yep. So micro yeses, those micro wins keep you out of those survival, instinctual fight, flight, freeze states. Now, we don't live in the wild, so it's not like we're literally being chased by a tiger, but our brains haven't updated. Imagine if you were still using the first version of your phone, right? Our brains are still set to defend against the lion.
Right.
And so whether it's an email, whether it's a message from your boss saying we need to talk, whether it's an angry customer or an initiative that you want to launch, whether it's your own personal mental health, we have to stay out of the fight, flight, freeze physiology in order to do anything. Fight, flight, freeze is great if you're actually being attacked by a tiger, but it's not helpful when you have things that you want to do and a life that you want to lead. Our brains are not wired for happiness. They're wired for survival. Mm-hmm. And that's an important thing to know when people go, what's wrong with me? Why am I not doing the thing I want to do? Well, if your brain is on fight, flight, freeze, if that setting is engaged, you're going to feel shut down. The freeze response looks like procrastination. The flight response often looks like what we call anxiety. And so micro yeses shift your brain activity from fight, flight, freeze, which you can think of as back brain stuff, to more neocortical or front brain activity. Front brain, I call the penthouse of the office of your head. And that's where the executives are there coming up with strategies and making wonderful decisions. But if you're in the back of your brain, you don't have access to your logic. And so we want to shift from back brain to front brain, and things like micro yeses allow you to do that.
I love that so much. So this is how I got into mindfulness and meditation, is because I was stuck. I was stuck in, and I want you to respond to this, stuck in what I called a loop. You may have a better terminology for it, but in a loop, a ruminating loop, like, why did I do that? Why did I make that decision? Why did this happen? And I'm just stuck. And then it's like, when we had, aging myself, a vinyl record, and it would get stuck in that loop right there. And that's what it felt like for me. And I'm just returning to that thought. What causes that, and how do we break that habit of the loop? And please share if there's a better terminology for it.
I call it the loop. Okay. I think most actual neuroscientists would call it a loop as well. Okay. And this is a little bit of a controversial take, especially coming from a therapist, but I'll stand by it. And here it is. The thing that will keep you stuck on a loop is asking why. Why questions. And again, asking why is useful. And the idea that we need to start with why as a business development principle is awesome. But when you're stuck on a thought loop, why is going to continue in that rumination. And here's a practical example. If you were to walk up to a building and the building caught on fire, you're not going to say, why is this building on fire? Right. The first order of business is let's get everybody out. If you're in there, we got to find the exit first. Yeah. Why is a great question, but those insight why questions should be a mile 7 question and not a starting gate question. So rather than why did I say that? Why did I do that? Why didn't I do that? Why? Instead, let's go to what are your choices? Okay. Anywhere we're mindful of choices, our brains are going to be less reactive. We're going to be more front brain solution focused, and then we'll be able to generate the momentum, which eventually produces motivation. Motivation comes from doing things, not the thing that happens before you do things. And so don't ask why is my hack.
Okay.
Oh, so sorry.
Here's another great one. If only I'd met you 20 years ago and had this conversation. But it's that so that's the other, if only. Is that another just a substitute word choice for the why as well? If only, you're also asking a why. Is that fall in that same category?
If only is code for why didn't I do it that way? If
Yeah.
only it is, you're right. You're
Right.
100% right. And the truth is that you can't go back in time and see how it would have worked out. So even if you had done the thing that you wished you had done,
Right.
you don't know that that would have worked out any better. And so why, if only any type of insight or analytical type of question, we want to save that for later. We want to shelve the insight and switch over to action. And with mindfulness, a lot of people feel stuck with that because it's really hard, like you said, to quiet all the chatter.
Right.
And so when people get stuck going inside trying to quiet their minds, my suggestion is meditation isn't always about going in. Sometimes meditation is about looking out. And that's where taking a walk without your headphones, without your phone, just go for a silent walk or sit still and look around at everything you can see around you. There are lots of ways to meditate, not all of which include closing your eyes and chanting and going in. Those things are great, but
Sure.
for people who can't or won't or don't want to do that, it's so nice to know there are infinite ways to practice meditation, just like anything else.
Right. And that's one of the things we talk about in the practice that I do is like using the term generically, but what is your yoga? Yoga meaning yoga is an actual thing, but it doesn't actually have to be yoga. If it is, I don't want to get twisted into a pretzel, whatever. What I really want to do is get out and walk in nature or climb a mountain or swim across a lake or, whatever. Or like I'm doing right now because it's cold outside, walking in the mall. I'm a mall walker now because just by choice and by environment and climate here in Denver. But I'm laughing as I'm doing this because I'm enjoying it. I know maybe it looks a little silly and I don't even care. I just think it's hilarious to get out there and do that. So I want to come back to one thing you said, just to clarify, because I've not currently, but in the past, I got in that loop so badly, and some of our listeners may be there. How do we break that habit? What do we do to make sure that, because that brain, one question I want to ask first is, why do we keep coming back to it? Is it something going on in the brain that's causing us to just return to it? Let's first answer that part of it.
Well, our brains, again, are not designed for success and happiness. They're designed for survival. And more practically speaking, our brains are designed to do pattern recognition and to conserve energy. Our brains don't want us productive and engaged. They want us to stay as small and quiet as possible so we don't trip up any of the animals that are out there. And so when we get into this why cycle, physiologically, you're not going to get eaten by a tiger if you're sitting in the cave obsessing about why and what and if only. And so there is a biological evolutionary benefit to sitting inside your head on a loop because nothing is going to happen to you out there. It's one of what I call the benefits of staying stuck. As long as I'm obsessing about what and if only and what if and what about, then I'm actually not risking failure. I'm not risking rejection. I'm not risking going out into the world and making a choice that might blow up in my face. And so without shaming ourselves, we do want to name, it's sort of doing a cost benefit analysis on your own symptoms. There's a benefit to anxiety. There's a benefit to rumination. And what we want to do rather than beat ourselves up for doing it is to, again, return to what are my choices and how can I make those choices small enough that I can get a yes under my belt. Because once you bank one of those micro yeses, again, your brain will release dopamine. And the dopamine thing is the thing that makes us want to get up and want to go out and want to do that. And so it's so important to get out of the why and into the what. What are my choices? What can I say yes to? And how can I get a win under my belt, no matter how small? Stuck turns into unstuck the second we do anything, no matter how small the action.
Okay. You brought up something a minute ago that really got me thinking. You said when you go outside and have that walk, put away the devices and the headphones. So that gets to that point of digital detox. I mean, maybe we don't have to go to use that terminology. I'm not sure if that's where we want to go with this. However, I think it's important, if you don't mind, just sharing with us what's going on right now, because probably when you started your career, we weren't had this kind of device addiction that we have, I'm guessing.
Pre-smartphone, yes. I was pre-smartphone.
Right. And I believe, I was in my 40s before I had my first iPod, and then mid 40s by the time I had my first iPhone. I have a daughter who's 20, so who has grown up with that. It's been a very different experience for her. And I'm actually asking myself questions like when I'm reaching and grabbing for the phone all the time, I'm going, I was 45 before what did I do before then? Could I go back and talk to 44-year-old me and go, hey, dude, hey, we don't have to grab for this device every minute or so. Talk about what's going on with our brains there, and then why it is important to get outside or get somewhere, even reading a good book or something, where we don't have a device in our hands 24 hours a day.
And I certainly haven't figured out how to not do that. I have the same struggles as every modern human with a smartphone.
Right.
I get into the doom scroll and the
Yep.
never-ending click, click, click. And we know that these devices are engineered to be addictive and repetitive because the more time we spend online, the more things we consume and purchase and whatnot. And again, our brains have no grid for all of the information that's coming at us. If you were to think of your brain like a house, the electricity can only be so many, it can only be so strong before your wires get fried. Mm-hmm. Our brains were never designed to be able to see what every single person in every single city in every part of the world is doing at any particular moment. And I try to remind myself of this when I get into that hypnosis almost loop of I can't put my phone down, I'm stuck on it, and I should be going to sleep, and I'm watching just one more YouTube video, one more. And so a full detox isn't always necessary, right. But certainly knowing that these devices are designed to get your attention mm-hmm. and scheduling time to put it down. I know for me, my calendar is it's what I live by. If I don't schedule no digital time, it doesn't happen. So when people say, I need to find time to do a thing, you're not going to find it because there's too many things vying for our attention. Right. But if you consciously create time on your calendar, here's my time to unplug and do nothing, that can help. But especially with all of the colors and the haptics, one of the hacks that I don't do often enough is if you set your phone to grayscale, so the phone is black and white, if that's something that you're able to do, that makes it a lot less appealing to be on there. Scrolling on a black and white phone with no haptics is not fun, and it doesn't generate that brain loop that all the colors and sounds do. So switching your phone to grayscale is a great little hack if you're struggling with all of the social media online stuff. But going outside where there are actual living being biological things, since we are also a living, breathing biological being, it's good for us. I don't like it either all of the time, but it is important to put the devices down.
Yeah. In the remaining time, let's talk a little bit about your presentation then. You are going to be speaking, or you're a main stage speaker at our MGMA Operations Conference. Hey, everybody, it's in Vegas. It's I don't even know. I've had so many conferences in Vegas, and they're always a little bit different and somehow always the same. But the information you learn in Britt Frank speaking to you will be different. And so what can people expect to learn? Give us a takeaway or two.
Well, I'll tease this. I won't give it away here, but don't all of my professional bio and all of this lovely neuro sounding stuff is true. And I have done that, but I have a pretty wild, Dateline NBC worthy backstory. And I will share some of that backstory. And it tends to make people go, wait, what? Wait, really? Wow. And it's not pleasant and it's not fun, but it is a harrowing backstory that you will get to hear in Vegas. And the takeaways are going to be, one, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. And I'm a therapist saying that. If you're struggling with symptoms of any kind, stuckness with your finances, stuckness with burnout or stress, or if you have a loved one who has anxiety or whatever, you're going to get practical, actionable tools. And again, I'm a therapist telling you we can steer away from all of the analysis. We can even steer away from all the feelings. I'm a therapist that never asks her clients, how are you feeling? Because honestly, if we knew, we would probably not need all of the self-help things. And so rather than what are you feeling and take a deep breath, all of which are wonderful tools, you'll hear different types of things. And I like sharing tools that most people might not have heard anywhere, because at some point you get jaded, right? It's
Right.
okay, I know what I'm supposed to do and I'm not doing it. So what's wrong with me? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how your brain is braining. I think of my presentation like driver's ed for the brain. You don't need to be an auto mechanic to drive a car. You don't need to be a neuroscientist or a neurotherapist to be able to drive your brain out of stuck and wherever it is you want to go.
Okay. Okay, last question then. So before people go to this conference, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I believe it's March 2nd through March 4th. So I will put it in the episode show notes, everyone, just in case, but I believe that's where we are. Tell us a little bit about the book as well, then, because people could be reading the book prior to attending the conference.
Yes. So the book, The Science of Stuck, again, is the driver's ed version of all of the brain science. Most people who are wanting to take care of themselves generally have a to be read stack of books a mile high. And I wrote The Science of Stuck to be just bottom line information. So you don't have to read everything on boundaries. Here's just what you need to know. You don't need to read everything on anxiety. Here's just what you need to know. And so to me, it was the guide I wished that existed when I started my personal journey of wellness and healing, because it didn't exist. I don't want to know all the things. I just want to know what I need to know. And I wrote the book. You don't have to read it in a linear fashion. You can pop around, you can skip things. It's not like start at the beginning and find a quiet place. It's no. Grab this, throw it in your car. If you have a quick lunch break, 5 minutes will give you tools that you can use right now. So The Science of Stuck is sort of my love letter to all of the different tools and techniques condensed and synthesized so we can get moving and feel better and move forward.
I love that. So before we leave, we have an MGMA book club, as I was mentioning earlier. In addition to your book, what's something else you would recommend? What's a great book that you've read that you would like to share with us, or a recent read that you really enjoyed and got something out of?
Oh, okay. Well, I think my go-to that just does all of the things so beautifully is James Clear, Atomic Habits. And I'm not affiliated. I just love the book.
Yeah. We actually read that last year, and it is a wonderful book. So Atomic Habits, James Clear, everyone. And again, I'll put that book and Britt's book in the episode show notes too. So Britt Frank, neurotherapist and main stage speaker at the upcoming MGMA Operations Conference in Las Vegas. Everybody, please attend if you can. Britt, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, and I'll see you all in Vegas.
All right. That is going to do it for this episode. As I said, everyone, I will drop direct links to Britt's information, her book, James Clear's book, and the Operations Conference in our episode show notes. So until then, thanks for being MGMA podcast listeners.